Hello again, 122. In this video, this is part 2 of the French Revolution, and we will explain how the revolution became radicalized and bloody. On August 27, 1791, the monarchs of Austria and Prussia, fearing this revolution that had taken place is going to spread, they invited other European monarchs to raise military forces to reestablish the monarchy in France. And at the beginning of the 1790s, by the spring of 1792, the French are in bad shape, and they're beginning to look for scapegoats to blame for the military defeats. Radical political groups in Paris took the king captive, and they forced the Legislative Assembly to suspend the monarchy and call for a national convention chosen on the basis of universal male suffrage to decide the future form of government. And what they did was abolish the monarchy, and they established a republic. And on January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was executed. And the destruction of the old regime was complete. But the execution of the king created new enemies for the revolution, both at home and abroad. This did not meet with good favor amongst the old aristocrats and nobility, and the church was also appalled at this move. And on the foreign side, at the beginning of 1793, after the king was executed, most of Europe, that coalition of countries, and even Russia, aligned militarily against France. Grossly overextended, the French armies began to experience reverses, and by the late spring, France was threatened with invasion. To meet these crises, the convention gave broad powers to an executive committee of 12 known as the Committee of Public Safety, which was dominated by Maximilien Robespierre. And for a 12-month period from 1793 to 1794, the Committee of Public Safety took control of France. And to save the Republic from its foreign foes, they decreed a levée en masse, or universal mobilization of the nation. And this is a change now in the way wars are going to be conducted from this time on. In less than a year, the French revolutionary government had raised an army of 650,000, and by 1795 it had pushed the Allies back across the Rhine and even conquered the Austrian Netherlands. Because they're fighting to preserve their revolution, these troops are motivated. They see these outside forces as trying to stop them from controlling their own nation state. And this is an important step in the creation of modern nationalism. Previously, wars had been fought between governments or ruling dynasties by relatively small armies of professional soldiers. From this time on, conscription, or the draft as we call it in the United States, is going to be increasingly used to fight major wars. But when the dynastic wars became people's wars, warfare increased in ferocity and lack of restraint. The wars of the French Revolutionary era opened the door to the total war of the modern world. What to do about slavery now that the Republic has been established? There was a club called the Friends of Black that advocated the abolition of slavery, which was done in France in September of 1791. But the planters in the West Indies, who profited greatly from the use of slaves on their plantations, opposed the abolition of slavery in the colonies. But the National Convention in 1794, guided by the ideals of equality, abolished slavery in the colonies. In one colony, they had already started rebelling. In Saint-Domingue, the western third of the island of Hispaniola, inspired by the revolution in France, revolted against French plantation owners. Led by Toussaint Louverture, a son of African slaves, more than 100,000 black slaves rose in revolt and seized control of Hispaniola. Later, an army sent by Napoleon captured Louverture, and he ends up dying in captivity back in France. It was way too cold there in the winter for a person of the Caribbean region, which is similar in climate to the Marianas Islands. But the French soldiers were stricken by those tropical diseases that were common in the 18th, 19th, and into the early 20th century. Malaria, yellow fever, And that's what killed most of these soldiers. And to meet the domestic crisis, the National Convention and the Committee of Public Safety launched the Reign of Terror, and this is the bloody part of the revolution. Revolutionary courts were instituted to protect the Republic from its internal enemies. In the course of 9 months, 16,000 people were officially killed under the blade of the guillotine, a revolutionary device designed for the quick and efficient separation of heads from bodies. And this is where Haiti is located. And this is the country that became the first independent state in Latin America. And it was a triumph of French revolutionary ideas abroad. Robespierre himself, the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, ends up being guillotined himself. And a reaction sets in after he is gone as more moderate middle-class leaders took control. The Reign of Terror came to a halt, and the National Convention reduced the power of the Committee of Public Safety. In August, a new constitution was drafted that reflected a desire for stability that did not sacrifice the ideals of 1789. 5 directors, the directory stage now of the revolution, takes place. And this is an era of stagnation and corruption in the French Revolution. Battered from both sides, unable to solve the country's economic problems, and still carrying on the wars inherited from the Committee of Public Safety, the Directory increasingly relied on the military to maintain its power, and this leads to a coup d'etat, or an overthrowing of the state, in 1799, in which the popular military general Napoleon Bonaparte seizes power. And that's the end of this part 2.